Men, do you remember the first time you saw your future bride, your wife-to-be? Maybe you saw her in a classroom in first grade thinking, that's the one. Maybe you saw her on the basketball court or outside on the playground. Maybe you saw her in a church building serving and worshiping the Lord. Maybe you saw her doing something else or in a different situation. But if you were anything like me, you saw her for the first time and you were struck away. You were absolutely smitten. What about you, ladies? What about the first time you saw your fantastic hunk who was your husband-to-be one day? Maybe you saw him and he fumbled over every single word because he struggled to speak to a beautiful lady. Maybe you saw him and the first time he caught your eye, he was not wearing a shirt. And you thought, there's no other guy that I want in my, here we go, there's no other guy I want in my life than that one right there. Maybe you saw him and he was playing a sport. He was competitive and he wanted to win and you thought, I'm going to win his heart. Or maybe you saw him working on a car outside or working the field and you thought, I want a man who knows how to work hard. You see, from the initial stage, that moment he or she catches our eye, to the stage where one day you stood and you made those vows before you and that person and friends and family and the Lord. Somewhere in between here is what we call the courting stage. The stage where you dated that person with the ultimate goal of getting to marry that person. It's a very important stage in the relationship. You see, Emily and I, when we were dating, we would talk, text, or communicate on Facebook for what seemed like hours and hours every day. We loved to talk. And every time I would have to leave her presence, whether we were hanging out, and eating a dinner, or watching TV, or whatever we were doing, every time I would leave, all that I could think about the whole time was the next time I was going to see her. I always thought that she always had the next best outfit to wear because every time I saw her, she was wearing a new outfit, and I thought the next one always looked better than the last one. Ladies, I don't know how you do that, but you do. You see, the courting stage was very important to Emily and I. We took pictures all the time because we thought everything that we did together was just the next best thing. So we had pictures all the time taken. We also went on dates very frequently. But you know what the dates were? They didn't always seem to be something big and glamorous. They might just be a small meal shared together at the end of the day. But we always viewed them as dates because they were important. You had to look good. She had to look good. We had to make sure everything was right. It was of great importance. You see, the courting stage for Emily and I was very active, was very passionate, was something we loved. What about you? What was your courting stage like? What was your dating stage like? For some of you, that was 42 plus years this year. For some of you, it may be less than a decade ago. But I believe that each one of you in here, if you've been married, can connect with the fact that there was a time where she blew you off your feet and where he left you speechless. You may not connect with the text messaging and the late night phone calls and the connecting on Facebook because that may be our generation. but I can promise you, you can connect with a passionate, pursuing, courting relationship. But then what? What happened? You see, on August the 12th, 2011, I had the great privilege of standing with our friends and our family and before the Lord and making wedding vows public with Emily. We got married that day. And you know what? It wasn't a week after or 2 weeks after or even a couple of months after, but slowly over time, and maybe quicker than I had hoped, those attitudes and those actions and those passions and those feelings that were so driven, those things seemed to fade. The way that we used to do things when we were dating tended to fade, and they faded pretty quickly. You see, I was deceived, probably, just like most of us in here, that the end-all, be-all of the pursuing relationship is the wedding day, is the day that we get married. But the truth of the matter is this: the wedding day, the day that you make that public commitment with friends and family and the Lord, that is just the beginning of the relationship. It's not the end, but that is the beginning. So today, I'd like us to ask the question, what are some ways, in what ways can we take those principles of pursuing that we had in that courting relationship, and how can we allow those to be aspects of our marriage, whether 10 years of married or whether 40 years of married or however long we've been married? How can the aspects of the pursuit of marriage, what are some ways that we can make those a part of our marriage today? Today we're going to be in Ruth chapter 3. And as you turn to Ruth chapter 3, if you were here last week in chapter 2, we were introduced to the relationship, to the beginning of a relationship between Boaz and Ruth. It was the first time that they had seen each other. It was the first time that their eyes had locked. It was the first time that they had ever encountered one another. He was a wealthy businessman, and she was a humble but driven lady who was gleaning the threshing floor, gleaning the fields, and working hard. You see, we get their first encounter in chapter 2, and in chapter 4 next week, we're going to see how their relationship culminates, how it ends, and potentially how the story ends. But today in chapter 3, we get the great opportunity of a text that gives us great insight into that deeper, that development of the more intimate relationship between two people, that kind of courting, that kind of pursuing type of relationship that for us today can give us great insight as to us in the married relationship, ways that we can allow ourselves to continue to pursue our wives and to continue to actively pursue our husbands. So there are three aspects that I want you to look at today as we look at that deeper, more intimate relationship that is developing in the life of Ruth and Boaz. First, I want you to look at wisdom. Secondly, I want you to look at chivalry. And third, I want you to think about the Holy Spirit. So will you open up Ruth chapter 3 today? Starting in verse 1, the first thing we're going to talk about is wisdom. Wisdom in that pursuing type relationship and how we can continue to live wisely in our marriage. Ruth chapter 3, starting in verse 1. One day, Naomi, Ruth's mother-in-law, said to her, before we get into what she said, listen, one of the most wisest things that you did in your courting relationship with that guy or that girl was you, if you were anything like me, you asked for the advice of other people. You see, asking for advice is not a display of weakness. Asking for godly wisdom, godly counsel from other people, it's a very wise thing to do. So why would we stop asking for advice once we actually get married? Look at the advice that she gains from her mother-in-law. Naomi says, "My daughter, should I not try to find a home for you where you will be well provided for? Is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been, is he not a kinsman redeemer of ours? Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. So wash yourself, perfume yourself, and put on your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place that he is lying. Then go, uncover his feet, and lie down with him. He will tell you what to do." You see, there's something very important in the courting and pursuing relationship that I think directly affects us as married people. We desperately need to continue to seek out wisdom and godly counsel from other people. You see, Emily and I, often through our marriage relationship, we find ourselves on the phone with the man who we had the great privilege of asking him to marry us. Emily's grandfather is a fantastic man in her life and now in the life of our marriage. And we are blessed to be surrounded with a man who cares for us, who not only wanted to marry us, but at the same time cares about our daily life. And as somebody who's done weddings, I promise you that the man who did your wedding, even though he may be absent from your life right now, or you may not be in conversation with him, he still cares about how your marriage is going. And so for Emily and I, we love the fact that we continue on a weekly or even a monthly basis of spending our marriage talking with her grandfather. It's something that's important to us. There's great wisdom to be found in asking and talking with other people through your marriage. And so I challenge you, think about the man who married you guys. Maybe you write him a letter. Maybe you try to involve yourself in a conversation. If he's close enough, take the man out to dinner. Take he and his wife out to dinner. And just start building a relationship so that you can begin to seek wisdom in your married relationship. Secondly, when it comes to wisdom, not only is asking advice a good thing that Ruth did, but secondly, timing is crucial. Timing is wisdom. I want you to see something. Look at verse 5. She says, "Okay, I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she goes down to the threshing floor, and she followed the advice, and she did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. And when Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. And Ruth approached quietly. She uncovered his feet, and she laid down. You see, timing is such a big deal. When you were in that courting relationship with your bride-to-be and your husband-to-be, you were very particular about how you had conversations, when you said certain things, how you did certain things, when you showed up. You didn't want to show up to the first date 30 minutes early, but you surely didn't want to show up to the first date 30 minutes late, right? You see, timing in the pursuing relationship, when to say certain words, it's important. And you see, for her, she knew that timing for Ruth was about making sure that his stomach was full, and at the end of the day, that he was in good spirits. You see, there's something very wise in understanding the timing of events. And in a marriage relationship, now that you have gotten married or have been married for years and decades, I promise you, timing is still important. You see, in the marriage relationship, there are plenty of arguments and confrontations, and deep discussions to be had. But they are not to always be had at the same time. You see, when you are going to confront your wife, or your wife is going to confront you, it's important that timing is crucial. For instance, when you are in public, you may be in Walmart, and she may be looking at buying a certain outfit or a certain product that Walmart may have. And the worst thing that you could do, it'll trigger something in your brain. I wish she wouldn't spend all of our money in this form, in this fashion. You know, there's a financial conversation that needs to take place amongst a husband and a wife. And yet at Walmart, in the aisle, with the groceries and everything, that may not be the best time to try to have that conversation. There's nothing wrong with having a financial conversation amongst husband and wife. It certainly needs to happen. But there is a certain time as husbands and certain time as wives that we may need to have those conversations. For instance, you may need to confront your wife, or you may need to confront your husband about something in particular. And immediately when he or she walks through the front door or the side door after a long day of hard work, may not be the best time to confront your husband or your wife. You see, timing in the marriage relationship is extremely important. Discerning the right time to have the conversations, to talk about finances, to be romantic. Discerning those right times is a very wise thing to do. You know, and finally, the last aspect of wisdom that Ruth shows us happens in verse 8 and 9. Listen to what happens. In the middle of the night, something startled the man, and he turned and he discovered, there's a woman lying at his feet. And he says, "Who are you?" he asked. And listen to her response in chapter 3, verse 9. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Will you please spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer?" Listen here. Wisdom. This is a tough point. Wisdom is about knowing and doing your homework beforehand. You see, Ruth, I want to show you in Ruth chapter 2, verse 12. Listen to what she says. 2:12. "Boaz, may the Lord repay you for what he has done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have taken refuge." You see, in their first encounter of Boaz and Ruth, he was a man of character. He was a man of spiritual royalty and nobility. Boaz was a man worthy of Ruth courting and dating and pursuing that deeper relationship. One of the things that happens in our culture over and over and over is that we, as young men and young women, don't do our homework, and we take on this philosophy that's called missionary dating. What does that mean? That means that you see a man or see a woman who's very attractive, who you think, man, that may be somebody I'd like to get married and spend the rest of my life with, but he may not ultimately be a man of character, or she may not be a woman of humility. She may not be the woman that I really want to marry in terms of character, but she sure does look good. And so what do? We say, hey, I can witness to that person. I can evangelize that person. I can get into a serious dating relationship because I can be the light that that person needs. And ultimately, I will bring that person to Jesus. Missionary dating, in terms of hoping that that person will change in the future and become the man or woman of God that you want, is not a very wise thing to do. Ladies, if you are going to get married, make sure you do your homework. How the man has acted up until this point in the past is a good indicator of how he's going to act in the future. We have a sense of grace when we get into relationships, but we don't do it blindly. Ruth knew without a shadow of a doubt that he was a man of spiritual character. And when he says, and when she says, spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer, it was a way of her saying, listen, you have protected in the past. You have shown to be a good provider and protector up to this point. So will you continue to do what you've shown yourself to do? You see, what you've done in the past is a good indicator of what you will do in the future. And she wisely knew that. Ladies, one of the worst things that you could do is to get into a relationship hoping that he will change as that relationship goes on. So that's the wisdom of Ruth. You know, another thing that the courting relationship between these two really shows us is the chivalry of Boaz. Chivalry is not a word that's used very much in our culture anymore. It's kind of an old school term. But you know what? The attitudes and the ideas of chivalry are something that are some things that are amazingly beautiful. I want you to see a couple of things in his kind of chivalry. First and foremost, Boaz, was a man who understood that the words of kindness and blessing out of his mouth mean a lot. Chivalry understands the power of blessing. Chapter 3, verse 10. Listen to how he responds to her question. May the Lord bless you, my daughter. This kindness is greater than that which you have showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, do not be afraid, because I will do as you ask. All of my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character. You see, guys, you can open doors. You can get her flowers. You can even get her chocolates, buy her new shoes. You can do a lot of things to show your wife that you love her and you care about her. But I promise you, one of the greatest things you could ever do for your wife is to speak words of kindness and blessing into her life. You see, when you validate and you bless her life with words, it does something for your wife that we could never imagine. You see, when Emily and I were courting and dating, I loved talking to her all the time. You know, it wasn't we had to talk or there was a set agenda. But when you're courting and dating your wife or your husband, you spontaneously call each other. You want to speak and talk to her. You want to encourage her throughout her day. But you know, when you get married, sometimes those things fall to the wayside. So one of the things I would challenge you to this week is to call her spontaneously. Maybe she's got a lunch break or she's got a time in her day where you can make that phone call. Or you may put a text together that is very nice and is encouraging and is a blessing to her. Find a time during your day to show her that you're thinking about her, to show her that you care about her and love her, and you want to speak an extra word of kindness and blessing into her life. Because men, chivalry should not stop once you get married. But it can so easily happen. Speaking words of kindness and blessing are a big, big deal. Ladies, if you're in this room and you would like a kind word, a blessing word, just shake your head. There we go. We got some ladies who would like that. It's a big deal for men. Let us bless the ladies in our life. Secondly, Boaz had her best interest in mind, even to complete sacrifice. Look at what he does. Verse 12. He has her best interest in mind. Verse 12, although it is true that I am a near of kin, there is a kinsman redeemer nearer than I. You see, he makes it very clear when he says, listen, I am much older than you, and I can be that redeemer that you need as a husband. But there are younger guys, there are more affluent guys, there may be a closer redeemer in your life than me. And so what he's saying is, I love you and I care about you and I want to bless you. But in that pursuing relationship, he goes to a point and he says, listen, there may be somebody a little bit better than me for you. That is a sense of chivalry that is absolutely amazing. He is willing to sacrifice and put that out there to say there may be somebody better for you. Now here's what it may look like in your life. You see, when you were getting ready to get married and you were going out to eat, you didn't worry about where you ate. It was wherever she wanted to go. It didn't worry about what music was on, what was playing, what she wore. It was all up to her. You were willing to do anything and everything for her benefit. But you see, somehow we get married and then we start allowing our own selfishness to filter into the marriage. Guys, one of the best things we could ever do for our wife is sacrifice what we want for her greater good. And it might look small. It might look like wherever she wants to eat, wherever she wants to go, whatever movie she wants to see, what music she wants to listen to on the radio. You see, as men, when we're willing to sacrifice for her best interest, it is a blessing in her life. You see, when we're in that pursuing type of relationship, it's not hard to do those things. But somehow when we get married, we want to take back some of those selfish rights that we think we own. And finally, the thing that Boaz shows us that I think is very important is that he is willing to make a commitment. As men, commitment is hard. So look at this, starting in verse 14, or verse 13 actually. He says, now stay here for the night, and in the morning, if this man wants to redeem you, then we'll let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I promise, I will redeem you. Now lie here until the morning. There is something very hard about tangibly, publicly putting those words out there and telling your wife and making a commitment. You see, as men, one of the best attributes we could ever produce in our life is that our wives and our people closest to us can say, my husband is a man of his word. When he makes a commitment, whether it be a small commitment or some grand commitment, when my husband says he's going to do something, he does it. You see, chivalry is about being accountable to the commitments that you make. And it's very hard sometimes to make commitments in our marriage relationship. But as men who love the Lord, one of the things that we can do to show our wives that we love them is to make commitments public and allow our wives to hold us accountable to the commitments that we want to make. Men, be a man of your word because it honors the Lord. So listen to how the story ends. Are you ready? Starting in verse 14. So she laid at his feet until the morning, but got up before anyone could recognize her. And he said, Boaz says, don't let it be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. He also said, Bring me your shawl you are wearing and hold it out. When she did so, Boaz poured into it 6 measures of barley, and he put it on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "Hey, how did it go, my daughter?" Then she told her everything that Boaz had done and added, "He even gave me 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" So Naomi says, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens. For this man will not rest until the matter is settled today." You ready? Here's the last point. It has to do with the Holy Spirit. And you ask me, where do I get the Holy Spirit from those 4 verses? Boaz made a commitment. He said it out loud, and he said, "Hold me accountable to this." Not only did he say that he was going to redeem and he was going to do something, but he also put his skin in the game. He took 6 measures of barley, which was between 30 and 60 pounds. It was more than a day's worth of wages. And he said, "Listen, I don't want you to go home empty-handed. This is a token of a down payment that I am going to do what I said I was going to do." You see, he was a man of his word. But not only was he a man of his word, but he also put it out there. He also made sure that she went home with something. You see, when I read this story, one of the things, and I read this aspect of the story, one of the things that I think about is that if you are a believer in Jesus Christ and you put your faith in you put your faith in God through Jesus Christ, one of the things that God says is, "I will do what I say I'm going to do. I will return one day. I will bring all my children to heaven, to myself, that where I am, you can be also." That has not occurred yet. But if God says He's going to do something, then He promises He will do it. But you know what's even greater than that? God does not just give us His word. You see, when you put your faith in Jesus Christ, you were sealed with the gift of the Holy Spirit. That Holy Spirit is a down payment from God that says, "I will do what I said." And in case you were worried if I was going to actually do what I'm going to say, I am going to down payment my Holy Spirit into your life. You see, one of the most enduring aspects in a marriage relationship is allowing the Holy Spirit to lead and guide and direct our lives. You see, when we're about to get married and we're thinking we don't know where we're going in life, we don't know where we're going to live, we don't know what we're going to do, we don't know what the future holds. You see, when you're preparing to get married, you're hopefully praying, "Lord, what is it you want from our life? Where do you want us to go? How do you want us to live?" And then somehow you get married and you get settled in a place, and we forget that it's the same Holy Spirit who continues and who continually wants to lead and guide your marriage. One of the most important things you could do in your marriage this week is to pray together, to allow the Lord to lead and guide your marriage this week. You see, wisdom, chivalry, and the Holy Spirit are 3 great attributes of any growing marriage. And so 7 days from today may be one of the most dreaded holidays of the year. It is Valentine's Day. It is a day to celebrate loved ones and love between 2 people. And you know what? For the next 7 days, I challenge you to pursue your wife, to pursue your husband in the same manner that you originally pursued them before you got married. Don't let that pursuit die just because you've been married. So as Donna comes, I'm just going to ask you to stand, and we're going to sing a song together, and I'm going to pray that the Lord encourages you and invites you in your marriage to be the men and women that God created us to be.